Hello and welcome to another episode of Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. Tonight, we journey deep into the misty Scottish Highlands, where rolling fog cloaks secrets long forgotten and creatures that shouldn't exist still roam. But what happens when you hear something stalking behind you? Its steps as soft as the wind, yet heavy enough to make the ground tremble just ever so slightly. If you'll think you'll turn and see nothing, well, you're wrong. Imagine this. It's dusk. The last rays of sunlight bleed across the moors, and the shadows stretch long, devouring the light. You're alone, walking the ancient path you've taken dozens of times before. Only this time something feels, well, off. The air is just a little too still. The rustling of leaves, the chirp of insects, everything has gone silent. Then you hear it, a low, distant growl like thunder rolling through the hills. It's far off, but growing closer. You quicken your pace, but no matter how fast you walk, the growl seems to catch up, gnawing at the back of your mind. Your heart races. You don't dare look behind you. Your feet pound the earth, but the growl, no. It's breathing. The breathing is now close, unnervingly close. Suddenly, a shadow crosses your path. You freeze. The figure in front of you is no ordinary animal. Its fur is dark, almost black, but with a sickly green sheen that ripples across its body like decaying moss. Its eyes burn with a terrifying intensity, glowing bright in the twilight. This thing is massive, dwarfing any normal dog, almost the size of a calf. But it doesn't bark, doesn't snarl. No, it simply watches, its head low and its breath like the wind before a storm. You know without a question that it's waiting for you to make just one little mistake. This is no ordinary beast. This thing standing before you is something far worse. Something out of legend, and if you hear its voice, if you hear the three barks, you know your time has come. Tonight's episode is all about the Cù Sìth. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I kind of looked it up, so hopefully we're doing good on that part. Let's start with what we know, or at least what the legends tell us. The Cù Sìth is said to be a monstrous, ghostly hound. Not your average dog, though. This creature is enormous, often described as the size of a small cow, with fur so dark it seems to blend into the night, though some accounts describe it as having an eerie green hue, a color not of nature, but of something unnatural, something otherworldly. Its eyes are perhaps the most terrifying feature. They glow, casting a baleful light that cuts through the deepest of fogs. People say it's not just the size or the appearance that strikes fear into your heart, it's the weight of its presence, a pressure you can feel in your bones. And if you hear it bark, legend has it you only get 3 chances. The first bark is distant, almost like it's echoing across the landscape. But that doesn't matter. It's already hunting you. The second bark? It's closer. Much, much closer. By the time you hear the third, it's too late. The Cù Sìth is right on top of you. And if you hear that final bark, well, it's said to foretell your death. But where does this creature come from? The origin of it is so deeply rooted in Celtic mythology, it's thought to be a harbinger of death, not unlike the Grim Reaper in other cultures. But it serves a specific purpose. It comes to claim the souls of those who are about to die. In some stories, it's said to work alongside this one I didn't look up, but I'm guessing it's Beanshoe? A fairy woman or banshee. Oh, so that's what it is. It's spelled different, but it's a banshee. Guess I should have read ahead a little bit more there, huh? Whose wails also predict death. But the Cù Sìth doesn't wail. No, it waits, lurking just outside the realm of the living, guiding the souls into the afterlife. Where does it live, you ask? The highlands are its domain. It roams the moors, the deep valleys, and the rocky hillsides. Often it's said to linger near burial grounds, ancient tombs, or places where the boundary between our world and the other is thin. It appears on nights when the fog rolls thick and the wind carries the scent of death. The Cù Sìth is a solitary creature, unseen by most, but always there, watching and waiting. Let's dive deeper into some eyewitness accounts where those who have come face to face with the Cù Sìth describe their encounters in terrifying detail. First, let's talk about Lachlan's experience, the shepherd who thought he'd seen all there was to see in the Highlands, until that night. It started out as an ordinary evening with the sun barely clinging to the horizon and the mist slowly creeping in from the sea. Lachlan was out with his flock, his trusty dog by his side. They'd done this routine hundreds of times, but this time, something was different. His dog, normally fearless, began whimpering, its body tense, hackles raised. The dog had never acted like this before. At first, Lachlan ignored it, but then he heard a sound. A low, resonating growl that seemed to ripple through the thickening fog. It wasn't close, but it wasn't that far either. Just enough to make his spine tingle. Lachlan turned, trying to peer through the mist, but saw nothing. His dog whimpered again, straining against the leash, desperate to flee. That's when he saw the shadow, massive, hulking, moving between the boulders. It wasn't fully visible, more like a shape that blended with the darkness, except for one thing: the eyes. Two burning, glowing eyes fixed on him from the mist, unmoving. Lachlan couldn't breathe. The creature didn't move closer, it simply stared, watching. He swore later that it was as if it was waiting for him to make the first move. He didn't dare. He turned slowly, never breaking eye contact, and began backing away, his heart pounding in his chest. His dog, normally a fighter, had already started to cower behind him. Lachlan never ran. He walked slowly, deliberately back to the village. He felt its eyes on him the whole time, like a weight pressing down on him. The next morning, one of his sheep was dead, its body untouched, but its face twisted in terror, eyes wide and staring into the void. Lachlan never ventured back out to that part of the moor again. Next, we have Moira's story. Moira was returning from a nearby village late one evening, walking along the old stone road that winds through the woods. The kind of road where the trees seem to close in around you, where the shadows play tricks on your mind. The night was still, a little too still, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. At first she thought it was just her imagination, the wind maybe, and then she heard it, a bark, low and distant, carried on the wind. She stopped, straining to listen, but there was nothing after that, just silence. She shook it off, but a sense of unease began to grow in her gut. A few minutes later it came again, this time closer. A second bark, unmistakable now, deep and resonating, like a drum beat echoing through the forest. She started to walk faster, her heart racing. Then the third bark rang out. This time it was close, too close. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but something stronger, some deep, primal fear, kept her feet rooted to the ground. That's when she saw it. Standing in the middle of the road, its massive form cutting through the mist like a phantom, was the beast. Its fur was dark, almost black, but in the moonlight, she could see a strange greenish hue shimmering across its back, like moss growing on ancient stones. Its eyes glowed with a pale, sickly light, and it stood as still as a statue, its gaze locked on her. Moira felt the air leave her lungs. The beast didn't move. It didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. It just simply watched her. Time seemed to stretch on forever. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it turned and slipped back into the mist, vanishing without sound. Moira ran all the way home, her heart pounding in her chest. She told no one, but for years afterward, she refused to walk that road alone after dark. She claimed that the creature was no ordinary dog. It was something much older, much darker. And she was convinced it had spared her, for reasons she would never understand. Then there's Aiden, a fisherman from a small coastal village. Aiden was no stranger to the harsh conditions of the Highlands, and like most people in his village, he scoffed at the old stories of mythical creatures. That was, until the night he saw the Cù Sìth with his own eyes. He was sitting outside his cottage, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. It was a quiet night, with only the sound of the sea and the distant call of seabirds. Then his dog, a big hardy collie, started barking fiercely at the door. Aiden thought it was just a fox or a stray sheep, but when he opened the door, his dog bolted inside, whining and hiding under the table. Aiden stepped outside, scanning the cliffs. At first he saw nothing, just the mist rising off the water. But then, far off in the distance, near the edge of the cliff, he saw it, a huge, dark shape moving silently along the ridge. The creature stopped and turned its head toward him, its eyes glow, piercing through the mist. Aiden froze. The beast stood there for a long moment, then slowly turned and disappeared over the edge of the cliff. The next morning, the village woke to news that one of their own had fallen from the cliffs during the night. The body was found broken and bloodied at the base. But there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to suggest how it happened. Aiden never doubted what he saw that night, and he became one of the few in the village to speak openly about the Cù Sìth. Finally, let's talk about Ewan's encounter. Ewan was his traveler, passing through the Highlands on his way to the Isle of Skye. He was camping out alone in the hills when he had his brush with the Cù Sìth. It was the dead of night. The fire had long since burned down to embers, and the only sound was the occasional gust of wind whistling through the rocks. Ewan was half asleep when he heard it. The first bark. It jolted him awake, and he sat up, staring into the darkness. The second bark came a few moments later, closer, more distinct. Ewan grabbed his flashlight and scanned the area, his heart racing. That's when he saw it. At the edge of the firelight, barely visible but unmistakable, stood the creature. It was massive, its fur dark and shaggy, almost blending into the shadows. Its eyes glowed in the dark, watching him intently. Ewan didn't move. He knew, instinctively, that any sudden movement could provoke it. For what he felt like an eternity, the Cù Sìth stood there, watching. Then, as if deciding he wasn't worth the effort, it turned and melted back into the night. Ewan packed up his camp at dawn and left the Highlands, swearing never to return. These are just a few of the countless stories surrounding the Cù Sìth. It's a creature that lingers on the edges of our world, only seen by those unlucky enough to cross its path. Is it real? Or is it just a legend kept alive by fear of the unknown? That's for you to decide. Thank you for joining me tonight on Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. If you enjoy these chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with fellow seekers of the unknown. And comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. Love to hear from you. Love to hear what you think. Until next time, be careful where you walk. And if you hear a distant bark, remember what it might mean.